Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum and I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company, and we are taking a look at a Citadel Martini-Enfield carbine. And the story behind these can start in like 1882, and that's the date when British forces first land and occupy parts of Egypt. They're nominally there to protect the British government's interest in the Suez Canal, but the British are going to start exercising quite a lot of political influence in Egypt, despite the fact that the country is still technically a subservient state or subservient part of the Ottoman Empire. This would last as kind of a more and more fictitious state of affairs until 1914, when the Ottoman Empire joins World War I on the opposite side from Britain. And at that point, Britain has a really good excuse, and they just declare Egypt to be entirely a British protectorate, and they formally take over control of it. However, until then, they kind of had to pay a little bit of respect to Ottoman ownership or power over the area. So, the Egyptians are getting some of their military supplies from the British, or rather the British are supplying it as part of their general effort to kind of exercise political power in the area. And in 1903, the British are kind of done with martinis. They're adopting the SMLE, and so now if they're not producing martinis anymore, they've got some leftover tooling, and they actually send this to Egypt, where it's installed in the Citadel, which is a huge and like 850-year-old fortress complex in the center of Cairo. And by the way, at 850 years old, that would make it like the youngest ancient building in Egypt, I think. At any rate, the Egyptians set up this machinery, and they're able to start using it not to manufacture guns, but to refurbish and rebuild Martini-Enfields. And this is a pretty handy gun for a lot of the security forces in Egypt. It's chambered for .303. The Egyptians didn't have to deal with any of the older black powder or any of the older large bore, the 5.77-450 cartridge martinis. At this point, they're all .303s, and the British are doing the same thing. The British are using .303 martinis as a backup weapon to their Lee Metfords and Lee Enfields until they're able to fully equip the armed forces with those modern rifles. And what the Egyptians do is they get a lot of just extra spare parts from the British as aid, and they also pick up surplus, and basically they pick up martinis wherever they can get their hands on them. Both carbines like this one and also full-length rifles, and then they rebuild them there in Egypt. So there's a lot of misinformation floating around about these guns. There are people who think that they're Afghan builds or Pakistani builds or some sort of weird Khyber Pass thing. Well, they're not. The Citadel logo is for Egypt, and these are not made with Egyptian-made parts. They're made entirely with British-made parts. Now, they all look pretty ratty, especially this one, because they all led a pretty hard life. So, in fact, let's take a closer look at this one, and I'll show you the variety of different markings that are on it. So here's the main distinguishing mark on these. Citadel, a date, and like I mentioned, the Citadel got this tooling equipment in 1903. You'll typically find these dated out to about 1908, and then a star over a crescent. Now, when the Egyptians refurbished these guns, one of the things they did was to scrub off all the old British markings, except they didn't always do it completely. And if we look closely on this one, you can actually see there's actually quite a lot of marking remaining on this one, more than you'll usually find. This is a BSA 1896 Mark III Martini. Now, this one appears to be a carbine receiver. You can see that the bottom corners here are rounded to help it slide into a cavalry scabbard. The Egyptians didn't necessarily care or pay attention to whether they were making carbines out of carbine receivers or rifle receivers and vice versa, but sometimes you will find carbines that are in fact made with carbine receivers. Looking at the knox form on the barrel, you can see this marking it's not a star, it's actually two British broad arrows point to point. And that is the British marking for a rifle that is sold out of service, meaning it's been surplused or otherwise disposed of by the military. So this barrel, probably this barreled action, was acquired by the Egyptians as surplus of one sort or another. On the top here, we have an E marking. That indicates that this was Enfield rifling, as in 303, and then we have a couple of Egyptian markings on it. The original serial number is still more or less present there on the other side of the barrel. We have the original rear sight. Like I said, this has had a hard life. The rear sight slider is not so useful anymore. There is no bayonet lug on it. As a carbine, this pattern of carbine, I believe, should have had a bayonet lug, but when the gun was rebuilt, it was, the Egyptians weren't trying to rebuild exact duplicates of whatever the British issue guns had been. They were just building rifles to be functional guns. So if they didn't have a bayonet or didn't want to bother with it, they just left the bayonet lug off of this one. And if you want to talk about a gun that's had a long and hard service life, check that out. This is actually the remnants of a front sight, which appears to have been worn down almost completely. There's just barely a little bit of a bump left right in here where there should be a front sight blade. The Egyptians also fitted stock discs with some markings. I believe that's a unit marking, but I'm not completely sure. And then the blue paint here is actually kind of cool. You don't normally see that. That's a rack number from whatever organization had been using this rifle, this carbine, in Egypt. Probably the police. These were used by police and prison guards and customs officers and kind of a wide smattering of security-related organizations. We have another similar number on the other side of the stock. It looks like on this one they went ahead and put a rear sling swivel on. And I think there was originally a front swivel mounted here, it looks like, of some sort, but at some point in this poor thing's life, that has come off. For those of you who aren't familiar with operation of a Martini, it's pretty simple. You have a lever here that drops the breech block and opens the action, and it's spring-loaded at the end of travel. You can see the two extractor wings right there. When I pull that down, it's going to pop them out a little bit. So if you give this a nice brisk yank to open the action, it will pop the case out fairly nicely, and then you just slide a new cartridge down the ramp into the chamber, close the lever, that locks the action, and now it's ready to fire. You'll notice that the cocking indicator here points backwards slightly. That indicates that the thing is cocked, and when you fire, it pops straight up to indicate that it is now not cocked. Well, there you have it. Depending on the general outside condition, these are actually guns that are a lot nicer and better quality than most people are willing to give them credit for. And they can actually be really nice shooters as well. If you can get one that's in reasonably good condition and headspaces properly, it's a lot easier to get 303 British ammunition than it is to try and find or make 577 450 Martini Henry ammo. So I really kind of like carbines, and I like carbines that I can actually shoot in particular. And on top of all that, I really like carbines that come from interesting and off the beaten path sort of places when it comes to military arms. So I think the Citadel carbines are a really cool little cubby hole of history. If you agree, if you'd like to see more information on this particular one, you can do so at Rock Island's catalog page for this rifle that has their pictures and their description, their price estimates, and everything like that. And you can find that link by way of Forgotten Weapons, which is linked in the description text below. Thanks for watching.